When a routine traffic stop turns into a career-defining moment, a police officer's worst assumptions collide with a truth he never saw coming. His target is the woman who holds his future in her hands. The sun was beginning its descent over the streets of Austin, painting the sky with streaks of gold and amber. Monica Reyes was on her way home after a long day at the office. Her sleek black sedan hummed softly as she adjusted the air conditioning, eager to shake off the day's stress. The radio played faintly in the background, a soothing antidote to the bustling city streets. She approached a yellow light, slowing down just as it turned red. That's when the blue and red lights erupted behind her, accompanied by the sharp blare of a police siren. Monica glanced in her rearview mirror, her brows furrowing slightly. She pulled over to the side of the road, rolling down her window as a police cruiser parked behind her. Out stepped Officer Jake Harlow, mid-30s, with a buzz cut and a badge gleaming on his chest. Harlow adjusted his belt as he swaggered toward Monica's car, exuding the confidence of someone used to being in control. "License and registration," Harlow said curtly, his voice flat but laced with a hint of authority. Monica complied without a word, reaching into her glove compartment for her registration and handing over her driver's license. Her movements were deliberate and calm, but she could feel Harlow's gaze scrutinizing her, as if searching for a reason to dig deeper. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Harlow asked, leaning closer to the window. "I'm not entirely sure," Monica replied evenly, her tone polite but firm. "You didn't come to a full stop at the light," Harlow said, though there was a flicker of hesitation in his voice. Monica frowned but nodded slightly. "I see. I thought I slowed down in time, but I understand." Harlow didn't respond immediately. Instead, he lingered, his eyes narrowing as he studied Monica more closely. It wasn't just a routine stop anymore, at least not for him. His posture shifted subtly but noticeably, as if he had already decided this was more than a minor infraction. The officer glanced at the license in his hand. "You're not from around here, are you?" he asked. Monica hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, "I moved here a few months ago. My address is on the license." But Harlow wasn't really listening. His questions were starting to take on an edge, just enough to suggest that he wasn't concerned about a traffic violation anymore. Monica's calm demeanor seemed to work him up, and he leaned in closer. "Where were you headed in such a hurry?" "Just going home," Monica replied. Her tone remained steady, but the subtle shift in the air was impossible to ignore. Harlow didn't just see Monica as a driver anymore. He saw something else, something that warranted suspicion. Monica could sense the tension building, but she didn't flinch. Little did Officer Harlow know, the calm exterior wasn't naivete, it was control. This was just the beginning. Harlow took a step back, folding Monica's documents with exaggerated slowness before tucking them into his chest pocket. He straightened up, his expression shifting into something faintly smug, as though he'd already made up his mind about the woman sitting in front of him. "Step out of the car for me," Harlow ordered. Monica's grip on the steering wheel tightened briefly, but her face betrayed no reaction. "Is there a specific reason for that, officer?" she asked, her tone measured. Harlow's lips twitched, but he masked it quickly. "I asked you to step out of the car. You don't want to make this harder than it has to be." The threat hung in the air, unspoken yet unmistakable. Monica exhaled slowly and opened the door. As she stepped out, Harlow's eyes flicked over her, sizing her up. Monica stood a little taller than the officer, her shoulders broad, but her demeanor unthreatening. Her tailored suit suggested professionalism. Her polished shoes hinted at someone meticulous and careful, yet none of that seemed to matter. Harlow gestured toward the front of the car. "Hands where I can see them." Monica complied, her movements calm and deliberate. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Harlow smirked faintly. "Just routine. We've had some incidents around here. You can never be too careful." Monica turned her head slightly, locking eyes with Harlow. "Incidents involving women in business suits driving sedans? Or does this have more to do with something else?" The question landed like a punch, and for a moment, Harlow's composure faltered. He straightened up, his hand drifting toward his belt, more reflex than necessity. "Watch your tone," he said, his voice hardening. "I'm simply asking a question," Monica replied. There was no defiance in her voice, just a quiet firmness that seemed to unsettle the officer. Harlow leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "You seem awfully familiar with how this works. You got something to hide?" Monica let the silence stretch for a beat before answering. "No, officer. I just believe in being clear about the reasons for an interaction like this. Transparency, you know." Harlow scoffed but didn't reply. He stepped back, pacing a small circle in front of the car. The dynamic was shifting in ways he couldn't quite grasp. Monica wasn't reacting the way most people would. There was no fear, no stammering, no nervous fidgeting. Instead, there was control, poise, and an unsettling calm that put Harlow on edge. "You seem pretty confident," Harlow muttered, almost to himself, "like you think you know what's going to happen next." Monica didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is." Harlow froze for half a second before turning back to face her. The smirk was gone now, replaced by something sharper, almost defensive. He opened his mouth to reply, but the words didn't come out. Monica's composure was throwing him off balance, and he didn't like it. As the silence stretched, the tension between them felt electric, and Harlow was starting to realize this wasn't going to play out the way he'd expected. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. The real test was about to begin. Harlow tapped his fingers against the holster on his belt, his frustration barely concealed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like Monica. His gaze flicked back to the sedan, as though searching for a justification he hadn't yet manufactured. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," Harlow said, his voice clipped. "I need to check for weapons." Monica raised an eyebrow. "Weapons?" she repeated, her tone incredulous, but still measured. "Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon?" Harlow's jaw tightened, and for a moment, his composure cracked. "I'm not going to ask you again." Monica hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable passing across her face. Then, without a word, she turned and placed her palms flat against the hood of her car. Harlow approached, the crunch of his boots on the asphalt breaking the uneasy silence. The officer patted Monica down in quick, rough movements, his hands lingering a little longer than necessary. It wasn't just a search, it was an attempt to assert dominance, to provoke a reaction. But Monica didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't so much as shift under the invasive scrutiny. "You're clean," Harlow muttered, stepping back. The admission sounded begrudging, like he was irritated that he hadn't found anything to justify his suspicion. Monica turned to face him, her expression calm but her eyes sharp. "Of course I am," she said simply. "Now, officer, if you're done." "I'm not done," Harlow interrupted, his voice rising slightly. The words tumbled out too quickly, betraying his need to stay in control. "You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why?" Monica folded her arms, her posture relaxed despite the tension crackling between them. "I've had my fair share of interactions with law enforcement," she said. "Let's just say I've learned a lot over the years." Harlow's eyes narrowed. "That so? You a lawyer or something?" Monica smiled faintly. "Or something." The ambiguity in her answer seemed to irritate Harlow further. He stepped closer, invading Monica's personal space, his voice dropping to a near growl. "Listen, you think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this?" Monica met his gaze evenly, unflinching. "I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness. And so far, I'm not seeing much of it here." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Harlow took the bait. "Fairness? You think fairness is what this is about? People like you always." He stopped himself abruptly, the words lingering like smoke even though they hadn't fully escaped. Monica's expression didn't change, but something about her posture shifted, a subtle but unmistakable signal that she'd caught exactly what Harlow had left unsaid. "People like me," Monica repeated, her voice soft but charged with meaning. Harlow bristled, stepping back as if realizing he'd just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "You know what I mean," he muttered, though his tone lacked the conviction it had moments earlier. "I think I do," Monica replied quietly. Her calmness wasn't passive anymore. It was razor-sharp, cutting through the pretense like a blade. "And I think we both know this interaction stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago." Harlow opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. For the first time, he looked uncertain, like he wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. The balance of power was shifting, and for the first time, Harlow was on shaky ground. But the moment of reckoning was still to come, and it would be one he'd never forget. Monica's voice broke the heavy silence, steady and unyielding. "Officer, I think it's time you know who I am." Harlow's brows knitted, his irritation resurfacing. "I don't care who you are," he shot back, though the faint crack in his tone suggested otherwise. Monica reached into her pocket, her movements slow and deliberate. "I'm reaching for my badge," she said calmly, watching Harlow's hand twitch near his holster. "No need for theatrics. I want you to see it." The words hung in the air, weighted with something unspoken. Harlow's eyes followed Monica's hand as she pulled out a leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing a gleaming badge. "Monica Reyes," she said, her tone as casual as if she were introducing herself to a neighbor. "Chief of Internal Affairs, Austin Division." Harlow froze, his eyes darting to the badge and back to Monica's face, searching for some sign that this was a joke. But there was no humor in Monica's expression, only quiet authority and a hint of disappointment. "Internal Affairs," Harlow repeated, his voice cracking slightly. "You're—" "Yes," Monica interrupted, saving him the trouble of finishing the thought. "I oversee officer conduct. My job is to ensure that the people wearing this badge uphold the integrity and values it's meant to represent." Harlow's face paled, his confident demeanor unraveling in real time. He took a small step back, his hand falling away from his belt, as though the weight of his own authority had suddenly become too heavy. Monica took a step forward, closing the gap Harlow had instinctively created. "Do you know what the most troubling part of this interaction has been, Officer Harlow?" she asked, her voice calm but piercing. Harlow didn't answer. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd walked into quicksand and had no idea how to escape. "It's not the profiling," Monica continued, "though that's bad enough. It's not the baseless escalation either. It's the fact that you've done all of this without even realizing who you were talking to. You assumed that I wouldn't know my rights, that I wouldn't understand the laws you're sworn to uphold. And why?" Harlow opened his mouth, but no words came. Monica's gaze bore into him, unrelenting. "Because I didn't fit your idea of someone deserving respect," Monica finished for him. Her words weren't angry, but they carried the weight of an indictment. "And that's not just a problem for me, officer. That's a problem for everyone you encounter in this uniform." Harlow's shoulders sagged slightly, the full weight of Monica's words landing squarely on him. He glanced down at the badge in her hand again, as if it might somehow disappear if he didn't look too closely. Monica stepped back, giving Harlow a moment to breathe, but her voice didn't lose its edge. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "You're going to take a step back, return my documents, and think very carefully about what you say next." Harlow's lips parted, but he hesitated, clearly debating whether to push back or comply. The hesitation cost him. And then Monica added, her voice lowering slightly, "You're going to hear from me again. Not as a driver you stopped on the side of the road, but as the woman tasked with deciding whether you're fit to wear that badge." Harlow swallowed hard, his face reddening as the weight of the moment sank in. He reached into his chest pocket and pulled out Monica's license and registration, his hands trembling slightly as he handed them over. Monica took them without a word, tucking them into her wallet. She stepped toward the driver's side door of her car, pausing with one hand on the handle. She looked over her shoulder, meeting Harlow's gaze one last time. "Remember this, Officer Harlow," Monica said. "The badge doesn't make you better than anyone. It makes you accountable to everyone." As Monica slid back into her car and started the engine, Harlow was left standing in the fading light, his confidence shaken and his future uncertain. But for Monica, this was far from over. Her next move would ripple through the entire department.